In 1839, Harrow Plantation reached a conclusion it believed would resolve a grievance forever. They bound Isaiah Crowe, a captive woodworker accused of ruining a fortune in assets, and locked him within a stone vault to wait for a public hanging. The estate owner labeled him the most hazardous man alive, not because he wielded a blade, but because he understood the plantation's inner workings better than the individuals who owned it. They postponed the execution, certain the barriers would hold and that terror would spread. By the moment authorities returned to fix the rope, Harrow Plantation had ceased to exist. The labourer quarters were vacated, the account books were gone, the manor was crumbling into cinders, and Isaiah Crowe was nowhere inside the room constructed to end him. How did the person they viewed as helpless transform their confidence into devastation? Before we proceed further, mention where in the world you are viewing from and ensure you subscribe because tomorrow's account is one you cannot afford to miss. Daylight broke over Harrow Plantation like a knife pulled slowly across skin. The horizon bled crimson and amber through the trees, throwing long shadows over the housing area where the residents still slumbered in the short quiet before the signal. In the woodworking shed at the perimeter of the estate, Isaiah Crowe was already conscious. He sat on a short bench, passing his fingers over a length of hickory he had been refining for 3 days. His hands functioned with the same intentional precision they always displayed, no wasted effort, no rush. At 43, Isaiah's frame bore the gathered burden of decades, shoulders curved from relentless toil, joints thickened from years of handling timber and steel, a scar slashing white through the dark skin over his left eye. His hair had turned silver at the sides. His expression was impossible to read. The entrance burst inward. Caleb Moore occupied the portal, inhaling sharply as if he had sprinted from the manor. Behind him stood 2 guards, men with clubs and sidearms, their faces glowing with the specific thrill that came from authorized brutality. Moore was younger than Isaiah by 15 years, thin and harsh-featured, with light eyes that never seemed to center correctly. He had been the manager for 2 years now, elevated after the previous one perished from drink. "Rise," Moore commanded. Isaiah placed down the hickory. He stood up gradually, keeping his palms in view. His actions were cautious, efficient. He remained silent. "I told you to get up quicker when I am addressing you." Moore moved closer, hand on the lash at his waist. "Do you hear me, Isaiah?" "I hear you." Isaiah's tone was deep and steady, nearly soft. It was the same pitch he utilized for everything: instruction, denial, or prayer. The consistency of it bothered people. They could not determine what he was thinking. "You are coming with us." Isaiah gave a single nod. He did not inquire why. Inquisitiveness was perilous, and quiet was a weapon he had learned to use with accuracy. Instead, he waited while one of the guards moved behind him with steel shackles. The iron was freezing against his wrists. The man fastened the restraints tight enough to pinch. "Walk," Moore ordered. They guided him out into the thin morning glow. The quarters were waking now, people coming from their rooms to see what the noise meant. Isaiah kept his gaze forward, but he could feel them observing. He could perceive the questions starting on tongues that knew better than to speak them aloud. At the manor, Edmund Harrow waited on the porch. He was a tall individual, slender in the manner of those who had never experienced true deprivation. Clad in a grey coat, despite the humidity that already weighed down like a damp cloth. His face was sharp-angled and pale. He carried himself with the stiff bearing of someone who believed misery was a matter of integrity. Behind the residence, the stable area was in turmoil. 3 horses lay deceased in their stalls, already swelling in the heat. They were Harrow's glory, pedigrees brought up from the coast, valued at more than 10 men combined. Their tongues hung dark from their mouths. Grime marked their snouts. "Poison," Harrow remarked. He did not look at Isaiah when he spoke. He spoke to Moore instead, as if Isaiah were an object, oleander in their grain, intentional, planned. "Yes, sir," Moore replied. "And you identified the guilty party." "We did, sir." Now Harrow pivoted. His look moved over Isaiah with the indifference of a man inspecting cattle. "Isaiah Crow," he said, "the most perilous slave on this territory." Isaiah said nothing. "You realize why I label you that?" Harrow drew nearer. "Not because you are aggressive. You have never raised a hand to anyone, have you?" Isaiah stayed quiet. "No," Harrow went on. "You are hazardous because you reflect. I have seen it in you. The way you observe, the way you retain information. You are too smart for your own good, and that is a trait I will not permit." Around them, other laborers had assembled at a safe distance. They stood in small groups, heads lowered, pretending not to hear while soaking in every syllable. Isaiah could see old Ben among them, the minister who conducted their Sunday meetings in the space by the stream. Ben's aged face was carefully neutral, but his hands shook slightly where they held his hat. "I did not ask for your admission," Harrow stated. "I do not require it. The proof is evident enough. Those animals did not poison themselves, and you had entry to the storage. You had a reason. I have been watching you for months, noting that expression in your eyes. You believe you are above your position. You think you can outplay the natural hierarchy." Moore stepped forward. "Should I gather the others to give statements, sir? Some of them must have witnessed something." Harrow gestured a hand dismissively. "Collect whoever you must, but be fast about it. I want this business finished before the sun gets too high." They brought forward 3 individuals from the quarters, each one terrified, each one pressured by nothing more than the unspoken risk of sharing Isaiah's destiny. The inquiries were basic. Had they spotted Isaiah near the horses? Did they know if he had been behaving oddly? The men provided uncertain, guarded responses that neither blamed nor cleared him. Their speech was dictated by survival. "There," Harrow said when the short questioning was finished, "witnesses enough." Isaiah had not uttered a single word in his own favor. He had not contested the charge or provided a reason. His quiet was read exactly as planned, as a confession, as pride, as evidence of wrongdoing. The refusal to beg became the proof that decided his end. "Bind him," Harrow commanded. "I want him held below until we organize the hanging." They walked him past the quarters once more. This time Sarah Crow stood in the threshold of her cabin. Their home, the one they had shared for 18 years. She was a small woman, dark-toned and sturdy, with hands marked from years in the estate kitchen. Her face revealed nothing. She did not weep. She did not shout. But her eyes connected with Isaiah's for one short instant, and in that look passed everything that could not be voiced. Dread, sorrow, realization, and something else. Faith. Old Ben stood with his head tilted, lips moving in quiet petition. The other workers watched in the grim silence of people who had learned that seeing death was required, but involvement was not. They took Isaiah to the old stone storage cellar beneath the manor, a low room built into the slope, chilled and dark even in the heat. The door was thick wood reinforced with metal straps. Moore opened it and signaled for the guards to shove Isaiah inside. The vault was roughly 8 feet across. The walls were jagged rock, the floor was hard earth. There was no gap for light. A single container sat in the corner. 3 days, Moore said from the entrance. Then we execute you in front of everyone. Create an example that lasts. The door hit the frame. The bolt turned with a heavy sound. Shadows consumed everything. Isaiah stood motionless for a long duration, allowing his vision to adapt to the lack of light. Slowly, small details appeared. The grain of the rock, the shape of the enclosure, the exact scale of his prison. He stepped forward gradually, reaching out until his hands met the wall. His fingers traced the known cracks between the stones, locating the spots where the mortar had been spread too thin, where the joints had been purposefully weakened. His hands recalled this labor. He had constructed this vault himself 12 years ago under the guidance of a different manager. Isaiah pressed his palm against the cold rock and felt sure. This was precisely where he was meant to be. The gloom was total at first. Isaiah stood still, shackles hanging heavy from his arms, and let the quiet wash over him like water. Slowly, his vision began to distinguish shadow from deeper dark. The vault took form in shades of black and charcoal, the arch of the top, the uneven feel of the walls, the thin gap where the door met the wood. The air down here was chilly and moist, heavy with the scent of old soil and stone. Water gathered on the rocks, dripping in the constant cold that made this space effective for keeping meat in summer. Isaiah could hear liquid falling somewhere in the corner, a steady beat that signaled time in the absence of light. His breathing made small mists in the freezing air. Above him, the estate resumed its tasks. Steps crossed the floor overhead, servants moving through their jobs, the sliding of furniture being shifted, voices talking in sounds too muffled to read. The noises were known. Isaiah had built this cellar, had measured the width of these walls, had figured exactly how much noise would pass from above and below. He moved to the corner and sat down carefully, placing himself so his back leaned against the rock. The chains clinked softly with every stir. The iron rings had already started to rub his wrists, but he disregarded the pain. Discomfort was data, nothing more. He shut his eyes and listened to the pulse of the residents above, sorting each noise, noting the cycles. Hours went by. The light under the door changed from grey to gold to black as the sun traveled across the sky and eventually dipped. Isaiah stayed still, saving his energy, planning through every element of what had to occur next. In the manor dining room, Edmund Harrow sat at the head of a long table. The night meal was set before him. Duck, rice with sauce, vegetables cooked soft, bread still radiating heat from the oven. Caleb Moore took the seat to his right, wearing his finest shirt for the event. At the far end sat Magistrate Theodore Blanchard, a heavy individual with cheeks that shook when he ate. 3 days, Harrow said, slicing into his meal with sharp motions. I want every person on this estate and the nearby ones to see what happens when command is broken. Blanchard nodded, cleaning grease from his chin with a cloth. A public execution delivers the right signal. These people require constant hints about their status. Exactly. Harrow put down his utensils, his plate mostly full. He rarely consumed much at night. This man Isaiah has been an issue for years, too bright, too composed. Others look to him even when he isn't talking. That sort of power is more hazardous than open revolt. Moore leaned in. He constructed half the units on this land, sir. Knows every structure inside out. If he had wanted to do real harm, he could have done far more than harming horses. Which is exactly why we must strike firmly, Harrow said, before he considers escalating. Blanchard reached for his drink. I will sign the decree tonight. Death by hanging 3 days from now at sunrise. We will build the platform in the main square where everyone can see. Make it a matter of record, Harrow added. I want other estates to know we do not permit defiance in any fashion. Consider it finished. Blanchard lifted his glass. To order and quick law, they drank. Outside the dining room glass, night had fallen entirely over the estate. In the quarters, people moved softly through their nightly habits, aware that something basic had changed, but unsure what it meant. Old Ben arrived at the vault door near total dark, carrying a metal plate with bread and a container of water. The sentry opened the door and backed away, letting the old man go down the 3 stone stairs into the gloom. 5 minutes, the sentry said from above. No longer. Ben's vision took time to adjust. When he finally noticed Isaiah's shape in the corner, he moved slowly forward and went to his knees, placing down the plate and cup. His bones cracked with the movement. He was past 70 now, his beard turned entirely white, his hands twisted from decades of field labor before age had shifted him to easier tasks. "I brought you some sustenance," Ben said softly. Isaiah reached for the cup first, swallowing slowly. The water was chilled and pure. He set it down and snapped off a piece of bread, but did not eat at once. "They are saying 3 days," Ben breathed. "Mourning, hanging, public." Isaiah nodded. His face revealed nothing. "Do you want me to pray with you?" "Not yet." Isaiah's voice was barely audible. "Tell me something first. The sentries, they switch every 6 hours." Ben looked puzzled. "I believe so. Why are you asking about?" "And the door pivots. I built them 12 years ago. They have been greased regularly since then. No one greases anything down here." Ben said, "This vault doesn't get used except for crates now and then." He halted, looking at Isaiah's face in the faint light. "Brother, you need to find peace with what is approaching. It makes no sense." "The mortar between these rocks," Isaiah cut in softly. "Do you recall when they had it fixed? Was that 8 years ago or 9? Ben's look changed to something like pity. He thought Isaiah's spirit was snapping under the pressure of his end, clinging to trivial details to avoid facing death. "Never been fixed as far as I know, Isaiah. Listen to me." "Good." Isaiah finally ate a bit of bread, chewing slowly. "That is helpful to know. You need to focus your mind on the Lord," Ben pleaded. "Get right with your spirit before—" "I am right," Isaiah stated. His tone held total certainty. "Tell Sarah I am at rest. Tell her I know exactly what I am doing." Ben did not comprehend, but he nodded regardless. The guard shouted down that the window was closed. The old man stood up stiffly, leaving the plate and cup, and went back up the stairs. The door shut again. The bolt shifted. Isaiah sat in renewed gloom, his mind moving through math and timing. Near midnight, fresh voices entered the cellar area. Isaiah heard boots on the wood above, then someone coming down the manor stairs. The main entrance opened and shut. Moments later, the vault door opened again. Sheriff Amos Ridley stood in the frame holding a light. He was a sturdy man in his 50s, with graying hair and a permanent look of tired calculation. Behind him stood 2 assistants. "Bring him out," Ridley said. They pulled Isaiah to his feet and walked him out of the vault, through the cooking area, and into Harrow's office. The estate owner looked enraged. Moore stood next to him, equally frustrated. "This is highly out of order," Harrow said. "It is the statute," Ridley answered. "Assets worth over $500 demand a county probe before an execution. Those animals were worth $800 each. By your own statement, the matter is finished. We have observers." "You have forced words from scared laborers," Ridley said bluntly. "I need to do a proper inquiry. The captive will be moved to county jail until I finish my work." "For how long?" "Until further notice." Harrow's jaw clamped. "This is a scandal. Submit a grievance with the leader if you wish." Ridley pointed to his assistants. "Take him to the vehicle." They guided Isaiah out into the night. News traveled fast through the housing area. People came from their cabins to watch the sheriff's cart drive away. Sarah stood in her entrance, hand held to her mouth. Old Ben breathed prayers of thanks. Isaiah sat in the back of the wagon between 2 deputies, his face neutral as they traveled toward the village. But inside, he felt the first component lock into place. Back in the vault, now vacant, the guards stayed posted outside. Isaiah could hear them bickering through the heavy door from his new space in the county lockup. "Waste of effort," one sentry grumbled. "Should have just finished him fast." "The sheriff has no courage," the other agreed. "Likely delay it for weeks now." In his new cell, Isaiah lay on the small bed and permitted himself the tiniest grin. The delay meant everything. It meant time. It meant the estate's focus would scatter. It meant the guards would become lazy. It meant the strategy could proceed exactly as he had drafted it. He shut his eyes and started totaling the hours until the following stage. The county lockup was quieter than the vault had been. Isaiah lay on the bed in his new room, eyes wide, measuring the flow of time by the subtle changes in heat and noise. The deputy on watch snored in the front area. A clock somewhere struck steadily. Outside, the world paused in that deep quiet that arrives only in the hours before the sun. Isaiah had been here less than 3 hours. He sat up gradually, shackles ringing softly. The bands on his wrists were standard equipment, strong enough to hold a typical captive. But Isaiah had spent 20 years working with steel, timber, and rock. He grasped how objects were constructed. More importantly, he grasped how they broke. He reached under the thin padding where he had stashed a piece of iron during the short moment the deputies had looked away to shut the cell. The fragment was no longer than his palm, taken from a damaged hinge in the wagon bed, sharp enough, sturdy enough. Isaiah worked the fragment into the mechanism of his left wristband, applying weight at the exact spot where the internal catch would release. He moved without hurry, every action intentional. The first lock snapped open after 4 minutes. The second took 3. He placed the chains down quietly on the padding and stood listening. The deputy's snoring went on without pause. The cell door was newer than the bands, but it had been put in by the cheapest worker using basic carpentry. Isaiah checked the hinges in the near dark. Sliding his fingers along the connection point, he found what he suspected. The bottom pivot had been fixed with screws rather than bolts, cheaper, faster, less secure. Using the metal shard as a temporary tool, he started turning the screws. The wood was soft timber, smoothed by dampness. Each screw rotated with little push. Once he found the right hold, he took out 3 screws from the bottom pivot, then 2 from the middle, making just enough room to lift the door out of its casing without a sound. Isaiah pushed the door open 6 inches and ducked through. The deputy slept on, his seat leaned back against the wall, weapon resting beside him. Isaiah moved past like a ghost, taking nothing, moving nothing. He reached the rear exit and found it closed from within with a basic wooden bar. He moved it carefully and walked out into the chilly morning air. The county jail sat at the edge of the village. Between here and Harrow Plantation lay 4 miles of path and timberland. Isaiah knew every foot of it. He had walked it many times, carrying gear and wood, constructing buildings for men who thought he would never use that skill against them. He moved through the gloom with confidence, following trails invisible to anyone who had not spent decades memorizing every part of this territory. The estate looked calm when Isaiah reached its boundaries. No lanterns glowed in the manor. The quarters were dark and quiet. Only the animals shifted in their stalls, feeling something amiss in the atmosphere. Isaiah circled to the back of the manor where the old vault entrance stood. The sentries had been relocated following his movement to the parish. Harrow presumably believed the danger had passed. The entrance remained unguarded. Isaiah moved down the 3 masonry steps and knelt within the shadows he understood so well. He pressed his palms against the brickwork at floor level, locating the 7th block from the left-hand corner. He had installed this very stone a dozen years prior during renovations after a gale. He had positioned it loosely on purpose, secured only by brittle mortar that he had diluted too much to ever fully set. The block slid out under firm pressure. Behind it, an opening led into the crawl space under the primary residence. Isaiah had constructed that dwelling. He understood its frame. He pulled himself through, surfacing in the pantry area where cold weather supplies were stored. Vats of fuel oil, bags of grain, boxes of records and journals documenting every transaction, every birth, and every passing on the Harrow estate. The gathered accounts of 3 decades of calculated cruelty, all meticulously kept. Isaiah moved with haste now. He unsealed the first vat of oil and knocked it over, allowing the fluid to soak the timber floor. He drenched the grain bags. He soaked the journals until the parchment bloated and turned ink black. Then he headed toward the living quarters. Isaiah walked to the initial hut and knocked twice on the panel. Low and distinct, it swung open at once. Sarah was standing there, fully clothed and expectant. She had anticipated his arrival. She always did. Forest, Isaiah murmured. Northern trail, tiny clusters, maintain silence. She signaled her understanding and went to awaken the others. Within moments, households emerged from their huts, clutching nothing but what they could carry in total hush. Isaiah guided them with hand signals. 5 individuals toward the east, 3 toward the north, 4 toward the west. Scatter, branch out, vanish into the woods before the sunrise exposed them. He traveled from hut to hut, freeing anyone willing to depart. Some declined, too terrified to accept this was happening. Isaiah did not dispute their choice. He simply moved forward. Old Ben appeared at his threshold, comprehension finally reflecting in his aged eyes. "God have mercy," he whispered. "Leave," Isaiah commanded. Before the day breaks, the elderly man departed. Within 20 minutes, the quarters were deserted, save for those too paralyzed by fear to flee. Isaiah went back to the primary residence and ignited a match. The fuel caught fire instantly. Heat rippled across the pantry floor, scaling the walls, devouring the journals with ravenous speed. The blaze reached the grain bags and surged upward. Smoke began seeping through the floorboards into the chambers above. Isaiah stood in the courtyard and observed the large house ignite. The galley went next, then the foreman's lodging. The edifices he had crafted with his own palms now burned according to his plan. Each fire jumped to the next via routes only he recognized. Yells broke out from within. Caleb Moore stumbled out in his sleepwear, howling for water. Edmund Harrow appeared a moment later, his features distorted in fury and shock. White men scrambled in every direction, attempting to form a bucket brigade, trying to salvage what was already ruined. They failed to see the quarters standing empty. They failed to see Isaiah strolling calmly away. By mid-morning, the pillar of smoke could be seen for miles. Isaiah stood on the parish road with his palms lifted as Sheriff Ridley's coach arrived. The sheriff pulled the horses to a halt and fixed his gaze on him. "Isaiah Crowe," Isaiah declared clearly. His tone held no sentiment, no boast, only certainty. Ridley climbed out of the coach slowly, his face unreadable. Behind them, the firmament swirled black with cinders. The irons went on more firmly this time. Sheriff Ridley secured them himself, verifying each bolt twice before signaling to his deputy. Isaiah remained perfectly still throughout, his wrists offered, his face devoid of feeling. The metal bit into flesh already scarred by former bindings. "Move," Ridley commanded. They traveled down the main thoroughfare in full view of the village. It was late morning now, the sun ascending toward its zenith, and the warmth pushed down like a heavy weight. People stepped out from shops and residences to watch. A lady in a blue gown stopped mid-stride, her jaw dropping. 2 traders stopped their talk to observe the procession go by. A youngster pointed until his mother yanked his arm down. This was not what they had anticipated. Escapees usually reached the parish lockup, bloodied and crushed, hauled from marshes or pulled from hideouts under barns. They did not stroll serenely down the center of the main road with their heads high and their hands steady. Isaiah heard the murmurs drifting behind him like vapor. That's him who torched the entire estate. Heard he slaughtered no horses first, then marched straight to the lawman. The parish lockup sat at the terminal point of the road, a thick brick structure with iron-barred windows and a metal roof that held the heat. The scent reached Isaiah before they hit the entrance. Sweaty bodies, stale urine, anguish soaked into timber and masonry. Deputy Clerk Edwin Lowe stood in the doorway, a slight man with glasses and ink-stained fingertips. He held a journal open, pen poised. "Name?" Lowe questioned, though he already grasped it. "Isaiah Crowe," Isaiah replied distinctly. "Asset of Edmund Harrow." Previously, Lowe's pen moved across the sheet. His hand shook slightly. "Accused of—" "Record what you must," Ridley snapped. "Put him inside." They escorted Isaiah through the front office into a tight hallway lined with cages. Most were vacant. One held a drunkard sleeping off his latest errors. Another held a youth no older than 15, his face marked by blows, his eyes following Isaiah with a mix of dread and awe. The cage at the far end was smaller than the rest, with a lone window set too high to access. Jailer Thomas Pike waited there, a thick-shouldered man with silver in his beard and no kindness in his gaze. He signaled Isaiah inside without a word. The door clanged shut. Pike secured it with a key from his belt, checked the latch once, and walked off without a backward glance. Isaiah sat on the timber bench that functioned as a cot. The cell was sweltering, stagnant, thick with the scent of old perspiration and stone. He shut his eyes and listened. Footfalls in the hallway, voices in the front office, the faint rhythm of wagons on the road outside. He had been in this cage less than an hour when they came for him. The questioning room was hardly bigger than the cell. A table, 3 seats, a window with bars but no panes, allowing in the afternoon warmth and the noise of voices from the thoroughfare. Sheriff Ridley sat opposite Isaiah. Deputy Lowe placed himself in the corner with his journal. Pike stood by the entrance with his arms folded. "You grasp why you are here?" Ridley asked. "It was not an inquiry." "Yes," Isaiah replied. "Harrow Estate burned last night. Primary house, quarters, storage units, everything." "I observed the smoke," Isaiah stated. "You were spotted exiting the land just after daybreak. I strolled to the road. I waited for you." Ridley leaned back in his seat. "Why?" "You directed them to bring me here for interrogation. I arrived. You escaped from confinement first. The door was poorly assembled. The latch failed. Lowe's pen ceased moving. Pike shifted his stance. Ridley's jaw tightened almost invisibly. "The blaze," Ridley went on. "How did it begin?" "I am unaware," Isaiah said. "I was in the basement until I wasn't. Then I departed. Accusations say you were spotted near the primary house. I walked past it on my route to the road during a fire. The road passes the house. There is only one path." Ridley scrutinized him for a long period. "You are claiming the fire was a mishap." "I am saying I strolled to the road and waited for you," Isaiah answered. "What occurred to the buildings is not something I can explain." "The journals," Lowe spoke up suddenly from the corner. "The ownership records are all ruined." Isaiah turned his head slightly to view the clerk. "That is regrettable. Those files were significant." "You are literate," Ridley stated. "You can read. I can read. Where did you learn?" "A teacher woman taught scripture to youngsters. I was a youngster once. That is against the law. The teacher left 20 years ago. I suspect the limit has passed." Ridley's palms flattened on the table. "You believe you're bright." "I believe I answered your inquiry," Isaiah said serenely. The questioning lasted for another hour. Ridley circled back to the identical points: the fire, the clocking, the flight. Isaiah gave the same meticulous replies, never expanding, never contradicting himself. His poise never faltered. He sat with his palms folded, his tone steady, his gaze direct. It was this stillness that bothered them most. Ridley had questioned hundreds of men. Culpable men blustered or pleaded. Innocent men protested too fiercely. Isaiah simply responded, as if discussing the climate. When they finally took him back to his cell, Isaiah heard Ridley's voice through the bars as the lawman spoke to Pike in the hallway. "Keep him apart, no guests except me." "What about the landholders?" Pike questioned. "They are already assembling, discussing a noose. Let them talk. This goes through official means." "They won't wait for official means. They will if they want their insurance payouts honored," Ridley stated. "A fire like that requires an audit. Can't execute the only witness before the district official arrives." Their footsteps died away. Isaiah rested on the bench and listened to the dusk sounds. Through the high window, he could hear talk from the street. Irritated, panicked voices, white men who held land and souls, suddenly realizing that both could vanish in heat and smoke. "Hang him now. Can't let this go. Every laborer for 50 miles heard about this. An example must be set for fear." Isaiah heard it in every syllable, not fear of him personally. Fear of what he represented. The chance that the order they had created could be dismantled by the very people they deemed helpless. The voices persisted into the night. Morning arrived humid and thick. Isaiah woke to the rhythm of boots in the hallway. Ridley appeared with Lowe and a man Isaiah had not encountered before. Older, wearing a formal jacket despite the climate, carrying a leather bag. "District Auditor Warren," Ridley stated. "He has questions regarding the blaze." They escorted Isaiah back to the questioning room. Warren sat with files spread before him, insurance documents, land valuations, initial damage accounts. He looked at Isaiah over wire-rimmed glasses. "You built the primary house," Warren noted, "a portion of it. I did the woodwork. Then you recognized its frame, its flaws. I knew how it was constructed. And the basement door. You fled through a structural defect. The door failed." "Yes, convenient timing." Isaiah said nothing. Warren shuffled his papers. The blaze began in several spots at once. The storage zone, the galley, the foreman's quarters. Witnesses indicate seeing flames in all three before anyone could react. "That sounds like inadequate fire prevention," Isaiah noted. "Or sabotage. I imagine an auditor would recognize the distinction." Warren's lips thinned. "You are implying this was an accident." "I am implying someone who stores lamp fuel beside grain bags, beside paper files, might wish to reconsider their storage habits," Isaiah said. "But I am not an auditor." Ridley leaned forward. "Where were the others?" "The people from the huts. I am unaware. I was in the basement. Then I was walking to the path. The quarters were deserted when the foreman checked. Perhaps they fled when the fire began. Before anyone signaled the alarm, terror makes people move fast." Lowe's pen moved frantically. Warren gathered his files with abrupt motions. Ridley stood, his chair grating against the floor. "This is not finished," Ridley stated. "I did not assume it was," Isaiah answered. They returned him to his cell as afternoon warmth descended over the town. Isaiah rested on the bench and listened to the voices outside debating execution dates and legal steps. He heard the term revolt repeated until it lost all significance. As twilight turned the cell dark, Isaiah stood and ran his fingers along the masonry wall near the floor. He found a loose fragment of mortar and pulled it away, showing a sliver of bare brick beneath. Using the edge, he marked a single vertical notch into the softer brick. Not tracking days, tracking endurance, measuring how long before panic forced action, before process broke under stress, before the order showed him exactly how brittle it really was. Morning arrived with the noise of keys jingling in the hallway. Isaiah opened his eyes to the faint light coming through the high window. He had slept lightly, waking at intervals through the night to the sound of talk in the street. Men debating fairness and assets, about statutes and making examples. Now those voices had subsided, replaced by the normal sounds of a village waking. The cell door swung open. Pike stood there with a metal plate and a cup of water. He placed them on the floor inside the cage without crossing the line. "Eat," Pike said. His voice held no sentiment. "Sheriff wants you looking right." Isaiah rose slowly. His frame hurt from the timber bench from days of stress held carefully hidden. He took the plate. Cornmeal porridge, a slice of salt pork, bread so stale it might have been cooked days ago. He ate steadily, aware of Pike watching from the threshold. "You got a name in the circulars," Pike remarked after a long quiet. Isaiah stopped mid-bite. He looked up. Pike's face remained neutral. "Messenger came through from New Orleans, carried papers. You are well known." "Well known," Isaiah echoed softly. "Dangerous worker torches estate." "That is the header." Pike shifted his weight. "Sheriff is not happy. Says it makes matters messy." Isaiah went back to eating. He chewed slowly, calculating the meaning. News moved faster than he had guessed, faster than the law could manage. Pike took the empty plate and cup. "You have guests arriving today? Law people, sheriff's command." He secured the cage door and walked off without another syllable. Isaiah stood and moved toward the window. By standing on the cot and clutching the bars, he could see a fragment of the road below. Carts moved past. White men in groups spoke with sharp motions. A paperboy shouted headers he could not quite distinguish. The system was reacting. That much was certain. They came for him in the middle of the morning. Ridley, Lowe, and two men Isaiah had not seen before. One wore costly garments and carried himself like someone used to being obeyed. The other was younger, dressed more plainly with ink marks on his fingers. The questioning room felt smaller with 5 individuals inside. Ridley signaled for Isaiah to sit. The well-dressed man stayed standing. "This is Councillor Clayton Marsh," Ridley stated, representing various parish owners. "He has inquiries." Marsh viewed Isaiah with the kind of careful inspection usually saved for stock at market. "You grasp your situation has drawn significant notice." "So I have been informed," Isaiah answered. "Papers as far as Baton Rouge have published your name. Freedom papers in the north are calling you a legend." Marsh's voice held disgust on the word. "That complicates things." "In what way?" "Public hanging creates icons," Marsh said plainly, "which helps no one's goals. Not ours, not yours." Isaiah said nothing. He had discovered long ago that quiet often showed more than a question. "The moved families from Harrow Estate," Ridley added. 23 individuals in total. They need housing. "A fast sail south would fix that," Marsh noted. "A fast sail causes panic," Ridley argued. "Other estates are already twitchy. Start shipping people south over this, and you'll have escapees all the way to the Arkansas border." The younger man with ink-stained fingers spoke for the first time. "There is also the issue of deposition. The district auditor needs a formal report about the fire's start, reports already provided." Ridley stated a thorough report, the man clarified. "Something that can be handed to insurance agents. They are doubting whether claims can be paid given the events." All eyes fixed on Isaiah. He met their stares serenely. "I can provide specifics about the structure's build, the storage methods, the lack of proper fire barriers between buildings." "That would prove carelessness," Lowe remarked softly from his corner. "Carelessness we can handle," Marsh stated. "Sabotage and revolt, we cannot." Ridley leaned in, elbows on the table. "The families, if we move them nearby instead of selling south, does that settle things?" "Depends on who says what," Marsh answered. He looked at Isaiah. "You maintain the fire was a mishap. Bad building, bad safety, nothing on purpose." "I maintain I do not know how the fire began," Isaiah said meticulously. "I can only talk about the building's floors and the flight. Door failed. I walked out. Nothing else to relay." Marsh turned to Ridley. "Local placement could function. Spread them across 3 or 4 estates. No kin divided. Labor deals instead of instant sale. Looks like leniency stops panic." "And him?" Ridley pointed at Isaiah. detained awaiting the auditor's final brief, then a quiet move. No public show. The younger man wrote notes quickly. Isaiah watched the talk proceed with the cold precision of someone watching game pieces move across a board. They were not talking about him anymore. They were discussing hurdles and fixes, balance and power. "I'll need names," the auditor's helper said, "of the moved families for relocation papers." "I can give those," Isaiah stated. Everyone looked at him once more. "You know all their names?" Lowe questioned. "I know every person who lived in those huts, their talents, their kin ties." Isaiah paused on purpose. Data like that could assist with proper placement. The room went quiet. Marsh's eyes thinned slightly. Ridley's jaw set. They grasped what Isaiah was proposing, help that aided them while also ensuring the families would not be split like livestock. "Write them down," Ridley commanded finally. "Every name, every talent. We will check the moves with you before finishing." Isaiah bowed his head slightly. "Certainly." They gave him sheets and a pen that afternoon. Isaiah sat in his cell with the tools spread on the bench next to him, writing in a careful hand. 23 names, 23 souls he could guide with accuracy rather than luck. Pike brought him dinner as the sun went down. "Sheriff says you are being helpful." "Sheriff would be right," Isaiah answered without looking up. "Heard they are keeping kin together. That true?" "That is the deal." Pike stood quiet for a moment. Never saw anyone bargain from inside a cage before. Isaiah set down his pen. "I am not bargaining. I am giving data they require. Looks like bargaining to me." "Then perhaps," Isaiah said softly, "we view things in a different way." Pike left the cage door unlatched while Isaiah finished his writing. The act was tiny but meaningful, a slight easing of constant watchfulness. Isaiah took note of it and continued his meticulous writing. By late afternoon, Ridley came back with Marsh and the auditor's helper.